This is Artflakes. Once again, welcome. This is Mutiu Olawuyi, your regular host of the show, Artflakes. And in Artflakes, this time, we're at home. We are dealing with Somali literature. We want to look at the world of Somali. I don't want to discuss too much about this. I want us to go to the other part of the studio to discuss in detail about the Somali literature and the Somali people. See you on the other side of the show. Welcome to the other part of the studio. With me today, I have two guests. One is known to you, and the other one just joined us recently. And on my right hand, I have Mr. Umar Osabo. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Mr. Hassan.
Nice to join you, sir.
As I've told you, we are focusing on Somali literature, and we're going to be looking at the Somalis and the literary world of the Somalis. These are two things we'll be focusing on in the first episode. When we'll get back to the second part of the show, we'll be looking at the literature itself. We're going to be looking at the literary work of Somalis and non-Somalis. So let me start from my right side here, Mr. Umar Osabo. What can you say generally about Somali literature?
To talk about Somali literature, I think we need to talk about the Somali region itself.
Okay.
Somali region is one of the most important regions in the Horn of Africa. The history of these great people, loving people, can be traceable to the Neolithic age, the Paleolithic age, Stone Age, as well as the Doin Age. It is in this age that, for instance, the history or the culture of the Somali people flourish. For instance, history has it that the first custom that buries people in East Africa or Horn of Africa started in Somaliland, in Somali. So, and these people, they are mostly nomadic. They mostly live a nomadic life. Most of them, they are into rearing of camels and all that. And even the history of camel itself in the world is said to have originated from the Somali region before it spread to other Arab countries like Bahrain, Egypt, Qatar, and so on and so forth.
Before we go into that, you mentioned the regions, but specifically, I just want our audience to understand this region specifically. Somali region, we have 5 different parts that we can identify as the region of Somalis as far as East Africa is concerned. We have some Somalis in Kenya. We have some Somalis in Djibouti. We have Somalis in Ethiopia. We have the southern Somalis, including Puntland, and we have the northern Somalis, the one we call the Sak, in Somaliland. These are the 5 regions that Mr. Umar is discussing about. Whatever he's talking about Somalis located in all these areas in the Horn of Africa. You can continue, please.
Yes, most Somali kingdoms, for instance, were well established as far back as 14th century, where the Adal Sultani were able to fight the Ethiopians and they reduced the Ethiopians to their nil during Adal Sion, that is a monarch of the Ethiopian people. And as time progresses, the British came into the Somali region in 1827.
That is now the northern part.
Yes, the northern part.
Which is called Somaliland.
Yeah, which is called Somaliland today. And they signed a kind of contract with the family. Usually they came with a phase of business, and later they would turn it to neo-slavery or colonialism.
That's when they bring the bullet.
Yes, that's when they come with the bullet. In fact, in the case of the where we are today, the Somaliland, they signed a business contract with they call it Article of Peace and Friendship. You know, in the article of peace and friendship, what they talk mostly in that article is how they will do business with the people, how they will do this and all that.
But that was between the Abarawal and East Indian Company.
Yes,
So
but before
who
that,
are those people? Because when you talk about the article of peace,
article of friendship,
it was between the Abarawal
yes,
and the Indian, the East Indian companies. Are they the colonial masters?
no. You see, the East Indian and the company and the colonial masters,
Yes.
at a point they are working together. This it's like they were working hand in hand. But before that, there were other treaties that were signed with some of the Somali family clan.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Hassan, I want you to look at this part. This is just a very straightforward one. In the Somali South and their language, or do you have anything related to, because as it talks about the Indians, well, we should look at the linguistic parts of the Somalis. How do they arrive with that Somali? Or is Somali just created overnight? Was it created overnight?
Looking at the Somali language, I believe it's something having to do some things. From which is something we can get Arabic language.
Okay.
It's Arabic.
We have
It's
Arabic
yes,
words.
Arabic words in Somali language, and that is that about that for now.
I'm looking at the source of these languages. You talk about Arabic, you talk about Hindu. Why I mention this is because of East Indian Company. When the colonial masters were coming to particularly East Africa, they had already finished the Indians, and they had captured them in such a way that they used them as instrument to capture other regions. One of the places they went with the Indians is the East African region, particularly the Horn of African region of East Africa. And that is why you have Hindu as part of the words in Somali, because even if you go to Yemen, the same thing, you know, you have Persian even used in terms of the history. If you go into the Yemeni literature, we're going into that later. But one thing I found out is that the language is not only Hindu, but the Hindu came in as a result of what we just discussed about. English language, Arabic language, because of trade, and also there was invasion when they had the war on their own part. These were the places they came to get themselves relaxed and join the people. And from there, with intermarriage, inter-commercial relationship, they got that. The other one is Swahili. Swahili is also part of the Somali. And even Amharic. Even Amharic. Yeah, most of the languages that surround these regions that I mentioned had effect, just like the history of English language. As to have the invasion, you have influx of French, you have influx of Latin, etc. Even if you listen to the Somalis in Djibouti, there is French influence on their own Somalis. So that is just that generally. So let's look at the Somali literature now.
Well, Somali literature is a very huge one. Actually, literature, as we may call it today, started in literature in Somaliland or in Somali region as a religious poetry and prose writing. And the sheikh and the scholars were writing the Gabaya poems. For instance, this started in 14th century. One of the most important book that we can use, that we always make reference to in the Hanafiya school of thought, was written by Sheikh Abdullah Al-Ghabi. That is
Al-Qalanquli. Al-Qalanquli.
Okay,
Al-Qalanquli. Say Abdullah Al-Qalanquli.
Okay, Abdullah Al-Qalanquli. You know, it's a very difficult one to pronounce. So, and there is a poetry, a kind of a press poetry called Kasida. Kasida is a kind of poetry that you can also find it in other part of African country, like in my country. The Hausa Fulani, for instance, they have very good poets who are composing oral poetry. which is called Kasida. So a lot of Somali poets are also into this. For instance, Margaret Lawrence, a Canadian novelist and a writer, when she came into the region in 1909, she described the region as the nation of bard and poets. That is, almost every person you see going in Somaliland is a natural poet. You see, this is just like what we have in the Renaissance age or Elizabethan age, where most of the English court, you will see poets. And up to tomorrow, we have it in some part of African countries. Like in my country, for instance, we have the Endogaru and Mawakai. You know, they will dig the bad and the groid. They will dig into the history of your 444 of great-grandparents. They will be telling you some lofty things. For instance, a good example of this kind of poetry, panegyric poetry, is in the ancient Mali. The ancient Mali, when you talk about the Kindiata, the Sundiata, and so on and so forth. All this is a known thing in African society. So the Somali also have it. So in each clan, the king or the sultan has a huge number of bard or griot or oral poets, so to say.
All right. Let me go to you. I want you to look at there's a scholar that described Somali literature. He made it divided into three. According to that scholar, I wanted to explore this part. What are these three structures or three different Somali literature that we have, according to the scholar?
First and foremost, before we can discuss Somali literature, there is something we have to bear in mind. Not until 1972, October 21st, there was nothing like written literature in Somali.
Okay.
Just because the orthography was not developed, not until 1972, which was 20th, October 21st.
October 21st.
So that was 20th century when the orthography was developed. And looking at Somali literature, it's something having to do with, the division, just three, according to Andrew Joski. One is the preservers. The second one is transmuters, and the last one is innovator. The preservers are actually those who had worked on the oral literature before they started the written literature in 1972. So they are the preservers. They tried as much as they could before October 21st, 1972. That was the work of the preservers. And the innovators, they just came on board to bring something new, to be globally relevant as far as what was in vogue then is concerned. Transmitter rather, they just try as much as they could from one place to another to transform something. It's more of reforming something from what it used to be. That is that about that, according to Andrew Joski, sir.
Okay. One thing I got from your presentation now is that you're saying that before that October 21st, 1972, there was nothing like orthographized Somali words.
Nothing.
Yeah. That means that they were using Arabic language.
Yes.
Am I right? From your own explanation, you were also talking about, let me finish this. You were talking about the Arabic, the prehistoric one you're talking about, Neolithic, etc. that you mentioned. You are referring to all this consider that you mentioned, consider is Arabic. So it means that you're looking at the written part. If you say the orthographized one, we have to clarify this. The orthographized can be in two forms. The Somalis in Arabic, all right? Because just like the Hausas in Nigeria, they were using the Hausa text, the Ajami, to write. It doesn't that they were not writing in Somali, but the code they were using was not conventionally presented as Somali code until that time, all right? Before that time, they were used to Arabic text. That's why when you talk about the second language to Somalis, we talk about Arabic. And we refer to English as foreign language to them. Particularly after the Syed Barry changed the structure. you know, the system, making Somali as a convention and coming up with something of that name. That's maybe something you are referring to. Now, I want to also look at these three parts. The ones you mentioned, where are we going to put some of this author? Like Hadrawi. Will Hadrawi fall into the three parts? You understand? I'm sure you've read a lot about Hadrawi. Are we going to say Hadrawi is a reformist? Or are we going to say Hadrawi is the transformist, or the transform of the text itself? Or are we going to see him as a presenter? You know? What are we going to, which of the authors are we going to put in this category?
This region, Somali region, has gone through a lot of transformation. I want to categorically state that there were written literature as far back as 14th century in this region. Because, and there were also oral literature, and there were also folk tales. Noticeable folk tale. For instance, some of these folk tales has been today reduced into writing. Like Kodin, the wise warrior, has been reduced into writing, and you find Somali at home and in diaspora using them. And Nuruddin Farah is a great Somali writer. As far back as 1970, he has produced From a Crook Creep.
Now that 70s, you are still referring to that time,
yes,
where they are using the Somali language
the Somali
as a text.
But
I really want to know which author can be referred to as a preserver, a transmitter, you know, a reformer. I want to be able to know which author
the authors that can be referred
I don't want us to deviate from
as reformer or the for instance, Hadrawi, Nuruddin Farah, Kristana Ali Farah, and among others, Mohammed Ibrahim.
That is what that's Hadrawi.
That's Hadrawi. Among others, can be seen as the reformers, because these are the much more later writers from this region. But before this time, my point is this: from huge material I've consulted, there were serious writing in this region before this time, as far back as 14th century. It doesn't matter whether the writing is in Arabic, Ajame, whether it is in Somali. For instance, in my country, the Hausa Fulani were using the Ajame writing for more than 800 years before colonialism and slavery came and introduced the English letters. I think the same thing happened to the Somali people. Yeah. So the fact that you use the Ajame, that is the Arabic text, to write your own language, that does not make you anything less educated or less intelligent. Knowledge is knowledge. For instance, if I studied French and you studied English, that does not make you anything different from me because you studied English. It's just a perception or the superiority complex the Western world appear to have on some part of the world. But in as much as scholarly analysis is concerned, we will say and we believe, and is there in so many documents, that there have been serious writing in this region as far back as 14th century. Then when you talk about the later writers, that's when you start talking about the Hadrawi, the Nuruddin Farah, among others. For instance, the most recognized Somali writers internationally is Nuruddin Farah. He has novels, he has plays, he has poetry, and all that. He taught, in fact, not just to Somali. Some writers are of the view that Nuruddin Farah is the only truly African writer who lived in more than 12 African countries. Let me mention the one I can remember. He lived in Kenya, he lived in South Africa, he taught in Nigeria, University of George. When he was in Jos, one of the famous play he wrote when he was lecturing in the University of Jos, Nigeria, one of the famous play he wrote was Yusuf and his brother. And he has received so many international accolades. There is nobody like that in Somali region. Nobody like Nuruddin Farah. He received more than 15 to 20 international accolades because of his writing. And today, as I speak to you, Nuruddin Farah is married to a Nigerian, Amina Mamman. He lives in South Africa. So it's an icon when it comes to literary world. He writes poetry, he writes plays, he writes novels. But back at home, I think Adrawi is more popular, is more acceptable, is more recognized than him. But for the international community, when you talk about Somali literature, in all the documents you will consult
I
on
think I'm going to look at it from two angles.
Okay.
I'm not going to fully agree with you on this part because of one very clear reason. I can see myself even as a consultant when it comes to Somali literature right now. I've done a lot of work on this. I will see the Adrawi. Adrawi is oral literature. You know, because you have to categorize this thing into two. You are looking at the written literature. If you talk about that, I will agree with you with
Adrawi
this man.
is a poet and a songwriter.
That's why I refer. Can I finish this?
All right.
That's why I refer to him as oral literature. He was known not as someone who published book or write this. No, though he went to school, he studied, but he was naturally blessed. There is a difference between being taught in a fall of a classroom to know the convention of literature according to the rule given to you by the West, and having it naturally in you. As you have talked about it from the beginning, you talk about Somalis as poets. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That they are known as bad and poets, according to Margaret, right? That is what I'm talking about. Adrawi is categorized as part of this kind of people, you know, not as conventionally westernized literature. Is pure Somali literature and literatures.
we are not-
So because you are looking at, you are saying that it's more influence here,
No,
or
I
it
am
has
not-
this that's international.
Can I say something?
So, but as
Can I
far as the
finish that?
Somali, I'm coming back to your own side.
Okay.
As far as Somali literature is concerned, okay, nobody, even the man you are talking about, respect Adrawi when it comes to the real literature that affect the life of the people themselves. Because you have to look at literacy skill of the people before you talk about influence of the literature of the work of someone. You can be a Somali and be writing for outsiders and may not have significant influence in the work of the country or the people themselves that you are representing. But when you talk about people who have values on the life of people, of their own people, then you come back home. So there are two types. I have no doubt about what you say, whatever influence you might have had, whether in Nigeria, whatever. But we have to look at literature has to do with the mirror of life. And if we are mirroring life, and we are talking about Somali literature, this part is very, very essential. If we are doing comparative, we shouldn't, we have to look at it from different aspects. But to say this one is far better than this one, is we are going to look at it from different influence they have from the people. So if you have anything to say, you can come in, because it's what you said that resulted to this when you talk about the issue of text and the written part. And I don't want to comment on your behalf. I want you to explain from your own side.
You know, as I said earlier, that the Somali literature is divided into three, which we already know: transmitters, innovators, and the preservers.
Yeah, the preservers.
Truly, I can agree with you that Adrawi is one of the transmitters, because he tried as much as he could to put more effort on the Somali literature. Something having to that will make it to be more outstanding, to be more presentable.
Particularly poetry.
Particularly poetry, yes, sir.
For the other one, is just like Soyinka. Soyinka, he covers all the genres of literature, right? But Adrawi is known as a poet, not a story writer, not a dramatist. That angle, I agree perfectly. But when it comes to influence of their work on their own people, I think we have to look at it from different.
And secondly, Nuruddin Farah is one I can call is one of the innovators, because he tries as much as he could to bring something new. You know, when you are innovative, you are creative. And his own creativity is more than just poet. He's one of the novelists we have, sir. And he published From a Crook Crib in 1998. He's one of the innovators. And Adrawi, I can say, is one of the transmitters. That's what I have concerning the two authors.
You see, let me make something clear to the viewers. My point or my proposition, I am not trying to say that one is better than another, but the point is that when you are talking as a scholar, you need to weigh the materials, the fact you have, the valid, the merit and the merit of what you have. You know, the point I'm trying to make is that this man, Nuruddin Farah, has taught in Canada, has taught in Oxford, many countries, Europe, America, Africa. Is known all over the world. For scholars from Europe and America to say Nuruddin Farah is the only living true real African, listen, true real African writer, that means a lot. And for him to have received up to 15 or 17 accolades from international community. So let me make a comparative analysis now. Adrawi is to me like Amos Totola or Cyprian Ikwesi from my country, Nigeria. This can be say they are early writers that are mostly accepted by Nigeria. For instance, our National Cultural Center, Art and Culture, is named after Cyprian Ikwesi. Yeah. But the later writers like Achebe, Shoyinka, and even my mentor Ben Okri, they came up later, but they tend to have this international recognition. That does not mean that they are not recognized at home. That does not mean that they are not good, or that does not mean that Cyprian Kwesi, Amos Totola, they are not good. No, but you need to say what it is, what you have on the ground, because in literature, reality is...
Okay, I've got your message. What he's trying to talk about is the fact that these people are conventional. They have every yardstick standard that the scholars use. But somebody starts something. Somebody opens the door before you start using the convention. And that is where we're looking at. We're not comparing, but every individual has his own home. As he has just done the comparative analysis, Amos Tutuola, he's just like that Hadrawi. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the rule of the West, quote and unquote, you know. That is, I feel that is a cage system to me. I am a philosopher, and when it comes to literature, I believe that creativity is convention. You know, convention given by a certain group of people. You follow the standard, that's okay. You don't follow the standard, then you are not okay. All right? So, in a nutshell, following the international standard that is controlling the world today, then it's referring to that Farah from that angle. But we have a lot of people that we're going to discuss about them on the second part of the show. That you will notice that they have the local influence on their people. Then there are people that have international influence, as he has mentioned. So when we get back to the second side of the show, we'll be discussing about this. And from there, we start discussing about the poetry, the drama, and the prose. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.